I grew up as a Roman Catholic. I went to church every morning from a very young age. I was told that I need to make confession on a regular basis, and it is a good thing to do. So I went to the priest on a regular basis and made my confession. Sometimes, even when I didn't have much to confess about, I still made up some sins so that it is not boring to the priest. As a child, I thought I needed to commit sins so that I can confess them to the priest. So the priest will know that I have kept up my end of the bargain, being a Christian, a wonderful Christian, living his life faithfully, committing sins. I am a good Catholic because I have committed some good sins. I remember, though, I did not have a whole lot of special sins than the regular stuff, like I disobeyed my parents, I did not do my homework, I talked back to my brother and my mother, I lied to my father, I stole a candy or a cookie from the jar. So the things that I committed were simple, ordinary stuff. They were big sins, of course, at the time. However, after you confess them a few times, you didn't have to think about what in the world you're going to talk about at the time. Simply because you have done it so many times, it's already in the back of your mind. The moment you hit the confessional, you remember those things that you have done wrong, and then it just flows out of your mouth. And then the best part of it is nobody's supposed to actually interrupt that whole process, because if you do, I may lose the flow of it. So at the same time, the priest, of course, was very nice. He never interrupted it. He would just actually say, okay, you did that, okay. It was very simple. He actually encouraged me in this process of blurting things out that was already in my mind. One thing that was funny about it was that I anticipated the priest asking me if that's all I have. And it felt bad when I didn't have anything more to say when he asked the question, if that's all what I have. So I will actually keep a couple of them behind, because I wanted to tell that to him after he asked me the question, if that's all what you have. And then I will say, nope, I got two more that I think I forgot. Then I will actually lie about it and say to him. And then when he asks me the question, so how many times did you do that? I will have to think about it, and I'll say, I think I did that about 15 times, even though I have no clue. I had no clue how many times I did it. I didn't count it, but I didn't want to be wrong. So I must have thought that if it was just 5 times, it may be too low. So I'll just add 10 more to just make sure that I have covered all the bases. Then I grew up. I began collecting better sins in my life than just those 5 or 6 boring things that I didn't even have to work hard to remember. I just needed not to be distracted while I was saying them to the priest, so that I can just blurt it out without forgetting them. My list of sins got better. I liked my own grown-up sins better because it felt like they were better than just talking back to my father, talking back to my mother, and being distracted during prayer time. Now in my list, I had copying that I copied during my exams. I hid my grades from my parents. I actually one time did not actually go to the church because I told my parents that I did not get my grades, and whereas I did, and I didn't want to talk about it. And then I am embarrassed to say here, even now, about the sexual sins of a 14-year-old in thought, word, and deed. After this sinful life as a child, my life status got upgraded. I joined the seminary. Now whatever I do had the potential to be really sinful, because here I'm leading a holy life. So I have to be very, very careful about living holy. If I thought something bad, and if I looked at something I'm not supposed to look at, and if I were late for prayer, and the list goes on and on and on. I enjoyed the fact that my sins are making a difference in my life. I am truly a sinful man. I could actually talk about it, and the priest would really know that I'm a sinful man. I could come up with a list of sins in a few minutes and feel good about them after I went for confession. My sins are making a difference in my life. They're worth keeping account of, and I even became good at keeping them, more than just a few that I could count on one hand. The more sins I accumulated and collected and got upgraded to, that was a good thing. I am actually in the process of becoming a holy person. In this process also, I began figuring out some of the good sins and some of the bad ones. The good sins are non-sexual sins, and the bad ones are sexual sins. The non-sexual sins are like my thoughts of yelling at someone and actually yelling at someone. But then if I did yell at someone, I will have committed a double jeopardy here. I thought to yell at counts 1, and then I actually yell at someone, which is counted 2 or 3, because it was not only just in my thoughts, but it's also in my actions. I actually committed sin. See, I have learned to create complex sins. That was an achievement. That was a process of growth. I have learned to create complex sins. It felt good to be able to create complex sins. It is a sign of maturation and growth. I am getting better at this thing. I thought to myself, I am a good sinner. As years passed, I started listening to my brothers in the community. That's when I realized that I was not alone in this wonderful world of sins we commit daily, and the harmless sinful people around. The list of sins grew, and the ways of executing them also got better. I then realized I have a good grasp of human failure and human sins, and therefore it is time to be ordained. I am a professional in understanding the sins of the other. It felt good. But then it happened one day as I went to a prayer gathering, which I used to do every Saturday. I was assigned a job of listening to these thousands of people who come there every Saturday for prayer. I was not a priest just yet. I had 6 more months to go before ordination. I sat in a corner of a hallway in this place and prayer center, waiting for people to come and talk to me about 10 minutes, their woes and their struggles of life, their sins and their failures. Even though I did not have the faculties to forgive anyone's sins, I was simply the listener for them for that day. Hundreds would line up to talk to me, and I felt wonderful about it because I get to hear all this filthy stuff that they've been going through. And I would listen to them from morning till late night. You know, the very thought of that I could listen to their filthy stuff makes me upset, makes me sad. But the truth is, that's what I could hear. I took about 5 minutes break here and there. Otherwise, I sat there for hours upon hours listening to the sins repeated one after another. Most sins are the same that I heard, but then occasionally there will be a big fish sinner, as we called it. There comes the big fish in the net. That day I got a big fish sinner in my net. It was Saturday in 1992. Mary, who looked like in her 70s, came to me. She looked sad. She sat in the chair in front of me and started crying. I began the conversation with a little prayer. I read the scripture. She poured her heart out to me, saying how sad she is because she hadn't received Holy Communion in over 50 years. To my question, she said, it was because she was divorced from her husband some 50-some years ago. She never got an annulment from the church. I said, 50 years ago? That must have been the 1940s, Mary. And she said, yes, that's true. It was because she was divorced from her husband. The divorced marriage was never consummated because she ran away from her husband's house the same night they were married. The man whom she married was crazy, as she said it. He had a mental illness. He walked into the room with a chopper, a sickle in his hand, wanted to chop her head off. She got petrified, terrified. She walks out of the room, runs to her father's house, which was about 5 miles away. In the middle of the night, goes back to her own father. And her father and the family members together filed for a divorce and got the divorce in 1940s in India. There must have been strong evidence for the courts in India to give a divorce to someone in the 1940s. She was from a wealthy family. Mary, after being single for a few more years in the household of her father, who got remarried because her mother had died several years ago, she fell in love with their driver because she's from a very wealthy family, a driver who was Roman Catholic. They had been married for over 50 years. They had 5 children, and all 5 were brought up in Catholic faith. They were baptized in the church. She went to church on a regular basis faithfully for over 50 years, but she never received Holy Communion because it was against the law. She knew it. She was a very faithful Catholic. She didn't want to go against the church law, but she did not receive communion. But then it broke her heart. For over 50 years after her application for annulment, she was not granted that still in the 1990s. Her heart was broken. It brought tears to my eyes. I listened intently and I realized I'm meeting with a sinner. At least that's what my training to be a priest told me. She's a sinner because she's divorced. Because she is divorced and she did not get an annulment. Her circumstances did not matter, because in the eyes of the church she is divorced and she has gone against the teachings of the church. Until she is reunited through the contrite acts for her divorce, namely the annulment that she waited for over 50 years from a man who was ready to murder her, she is still a sinner, not worthy of Holy Communion, the sacrament of reconciliation, the experience of a divine banquet, the love of a Father that sacrificed His only Son for the fallen humanity, a proper burial, and all that goes with it is denied to her. I did have a big catch, except that I was not authorized to forgive her sins, because I was not a priest just yet. I was not authorized to give her permission to go back to the table of the Lord. I was not given permission for her to go back to the confessional. I was not given permission just yet to have her buried in the church cemetery. I did have a big catch. With tears in my eyes and broken heart for her, I told her with authority, in the name of the Lord's, I am the follower of Jesus Christ, in the name of that Lord whom I follow, I forgive your sins. Go and receive communion. I will take upon myself the hell, if that is bestowed on you by the Lord, for receiving Him in your heart for over the last 50-some years, and today when you walk to the altar. If the priest declines to you, come and tell me, I will bring it to you. The Lord is in search of you, not anyone else. You do not need forgiveness. You need love. And I am going to give it to you. I am going to go to hell for you. And no matter what, and she looked at me and said, are you serious? I said, 100%. If the Father could send His only Son to give the world a redemption, why shouldn't I send myself to hell to give you redemption if that's what you think that you need to receive Holy Communion? Go, receive Holy Communion. I can't tell you the thing that the Lord said to the woman who was caught in adultery, don't do this anymore because you haven't done it. I hadn't realized then her communion with the Lord was much, much more, and every day than anyone could have ever predicted. I was a child in my own ministry. To know better that God's grace is beyond my understanding of or anyone's understanding and transcends the boundaries I have set for God. God goes beyond the boundaries we ever create for God. I knew then I needed to deconstruct God. I needed to deconstruct the image of God. I needed to free God from the boundaries that I had been trying to put him in. I moved to a different world altogether after that. I came to a new world. I came to the United States. I was assigned to a beautiful, wonderful, big old church in Arkansas. I heard confessions of all kinds of people. But my time with the children and their confessions were just absolutely beautiful and fascinating. It was a reminder of my own childhood and the way that I made my confessions, and I listened to them on a regular basis. And these first communion children, when they walked to me, came to my room to make their confessions. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. One day, I was told I needed to hear the confessions of children. And they're going to come to my room. And I thought to myself, it's going to be hard for these children who have never made their confessions. How will they know what all kinds of things they're supposed to make confession or tell me the sins that they've committed? And of course, they are going to tell me. So I had a list of sins in my mind, and I was not wrong. That's exactly what they did. I talked back to my mom. I didn't obey my father. I didn't do my homework. I was mean to my friends. The list goes on. It didn't change from the first world to the third world. Children are children. So one day, a little girl came to me, all scared and didn't know what to say. So I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to help her. So I was in the room, I went to the piano, I started playing the piano, and she sat next to me. It was a beautiful time. And then I thought I will start the confession, and I said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." And she nodded her head. And then, to be honest with you, I was thinking, God of mercy, what has she done to be such a sinner? I laughed at her innocence and how we, the clergy, managed to scare the Jesus out of the children. But that's not the point. The point is, I needed to form sinners and a consciousness of sin in these little children. I am the priest. So I continued, "This is my first confession." And she said, there was a surprise in her eyes, like, "Yeah, are you telling me the truth?" She didn't ask me that, but when I said, "This is my confession," she didn't realize I was saying it for her. And I wanted to burst into laughter, which I did not. The little girl nodded her head then, and then I continued that I disobeyed my parents, talked back to my friends or to my teachers, and I didn't do my homework. I was mean to my friends. And then her eyes just had this beautiful smile on her face, and she looked at me and said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, you're right. I have done all of this." I couldn't help. I just couldn't help but laugh. And I sheepishly nodded my head. After a few months of going through this exercise, I said to myself, I think I do need to invent a drive-through confessional that makes it easy on the children and the adults. And so, thus I started the script of the drive-through confession. I come and tell you the same thing over and over and over. It is easy to know what exactly they're going to say. So I thought, being a technologically advanced world, we do need to create this drive-through, and particularly in the first world when everything is available at the touch of a button. I thought maybe that's what I needed to do. So this is a script of the drive-through confessional, if you need to use them at some point. If you have talked back to your parents, press 1. If you have disobeyed your teachers, press 2. If you have lied to your grandmother, press 3. And the list goes on and on and on. And if they have done all of them, then they have to press 10. Or wait. You have to add something more. If you have done all of them, they have to press 10. But if they have made up some sins in the process of making these choices, they have to press 11. Then the penance will be disposed. Penance will be dispensed in the slot right below. They can pick it up and go to the next window, and the priest will absolve their sins. I know I'm making light of this beautiful sacramental confession. I'm aware of it. It is not funny. It is a sacred act of a powerful moment. The truth is, we only get a few big fishes once in a while. Most of the time, the sinners are repeat offenders. They know exactly this is what they are going to do. They don't need to come to me or to anyone else. Those are simple things that they need to make a change in their lives. They knew what they were doing while they were doing them. Here is why I say it. If you ask them how many times did they do that, they will tell you 15, 20, 12, 9. So I want to ask them the question, so were you counting every time that you committed the sin? Oh no. Then how did you come up with the number? And they go blank. Which tells me they lied to me. At the confessional, either they made it up, which was a lie, to just cover the bases, or they knew exactly what they were doing when they counted them. And they still kept counting them. Absolution is not going to make a big difference in it at all. They need to change their lives. I need to change my life if that's how I live my life. Simple and plain. I don't need to go through. For such people, we need a drive-through confessional. Press 1 if you have been mean to your neighbor. Press 2 if you have stolen stuff from Walmart. Press 3 if you have not been to church on time. Press 4 if you have been unkind to people in the world, uncompassionate. We do this every single day. We need to have some sort of a mechanism to tell us, or we need to admit the fact that we continually do this. The point of all of this is to say confession is a powerful practice of forgiving others. Most of the time, it is not God who is not forgiving the sins of others. God would care less. It is us. It is one another. It's me not able to forgive you. It is you not forgiving me. Forgiveness does not need to climb the seventh heavens. It needs to remain on earth, among us and within us. We all need forgiveness from those against whom we have committed them. For sure, that's the first step. That's sometimes the hardest thing to do. But we can start with those things that are not hard then. That's where the trouble is. In many cases, we want some human being with flesh and blood, a guy and a girl who we can touch and feel among us to tell us, it's okay. I'm willing to forgive you. I want someone to tell me, you have done things wrong. I am willing to forgive you. He or she can forgive and take that as a forgiveness from the Lord. Confession of sins is only for the benefit of the sinner, not of God. Confession of a sin, confession of a failure, confession of a brokenness is for the failure of, for my benefit. The Lord is not going to get hurt. Why shouldn't I confess to one against whom I have sinned? Why shouldn't I seek forgiveness for someone who has been hurt before it ever got to God? Can God be so sensitive that we hurt him? Like it started with just us? That every time we lied, we talked back, God was so sensitive that God can't even let go of these things? It sounds like God has a chip on his shoulder or her shoulder. Or should we have a chip on our shoulder that tells us that it is not God who we are hurting. It is one another we are hurting, and that's where the confession becomes meaningful and powerful. To recognize we are not hurting God, we are hurting the other. And it's not God who needs forgiveness, who gives forgiveness. It's I who has to give forgiveness. It's me, part of the community that has witnessed the pain and the struggle and the hurt, that has to give the forgiveness. Many times I believe forgiveness needs to be imparted by not only those against whom we have committed sins, we need forgiveness from those who witnessed them, those who have participated in them, those who had been silent during that whole process, those who can do something about the hurts and the pains and the struggles people go through. Let your forgiveness be towards your family, your friends, your community, your church, your pastor, even to God. Forgive your father, forgive your mother, forgive your child, forgive your grandparents, forgive your neighbors, forgive your pastor, forgive God. And forgive everything around us. Let your child give you forgiveness. Let your parents forgive your sins. Confession is a good thing, no matter what the context is, because it is not about God forgiving our sins. It's a given. God will forgive our sins. It is ourselves forgiving our sins. That's the key. It's ourselves forgiving our sins, and it is ourselves forgiving the sins of those around us who are part of the world we are living in. Somebody has to begin the process of forgiving. Someone has to start seeking forgiveness. Someone has to start seeking forgiveness for the repeated offenders. And someone needs to impart a genuine forgiveness that is beyond the church rules and beyond the confessional screens and confessional secrets. If that begins with a priest, so be it. If that starts with a child, so be it. If that starts with a community, a church, a pastor, a people, so be it. If it starts with a nation, so be it. Hitler needs forgiveness. Let none of those things that he did be repeated ever in history, but he still needs forgiveness of a world. God knows what God does, but we need to be forgiving so that we can journey beyond. Just saying to someone, I forgive, is plenty to change the world around us. It is when someone gives their time, forgiveness happens. It becomes a sacrament. It becomes a sacrament the moment I make the invisible grace visible to the people, whether it is done by you or me, or a priest and a pastor, a Hindu priest and a Muslim imam. When we are able to forgive, and when we are able to seek forgiveness, confession happens. And that has to happen beyond the drive-through windows. It has to happen one-on-one with the other in the community we are part of. Make the invisible grace visible. Thank you.